questions. We've got some samples, and Jim, I'll bet we're getting a lot of questions about that right now.
Right. This is just, I have a couple of plantings of beans in the garden, and this is my most mature one. They're flowering and putting on pods now, believe it or not. But just little holes in the leaves like this that are lacy, not very extensive. But you know what? When we have the hot, dry summer coming on like it feels today and tomorrow and the next several days, this is a good indicator too that once it gets really hot, those bean leaf beetles are going to need to have moisture, and they're going to be coming out of their hiding places, alfalfa fields or whatever, and they're going to be hitting the beans pretty severely. So this is just a flag to remember to be out there, whether you have little seedling ones coming up, they're especially susceptible, or even if you have older ones, just be out there taking a look to see if you have bean leaf beetle damage. They like to hide and drop to the soil, so you got to sneak up on them. But a quick remedy to control them, carbaryl really does a good job in controlling them if that's necessary. Normally, you know, when it starts hitting the pod stage or whatever, or flowering, I don't do that, but especially in the case of keeping the seedlings protected from their voracious feeding. So again, and then summertime is going to be a trigger now. This time of year, we're going to have the mass chafers coming up. I wrote a little list. Codling moth, remember codling moth, second generation. That's one of the first damaging generations in apple and other orchard fruits. Oriental fruit moth, and then we have those pesky squash vine borers coming out, and of course grasshopper nymphs. Keep an eye on them. So there's just a whole array of potential pests that are enough to make you paranoid for the first few days of summer. But be out there looking, and again, always remember to be looking when you're out there pulling the weeds or harvesting your crops.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jim. All right, Lowell, you get to eat your weed tonight if you really want to.
Yes, it's very good. What I brought in is, absolutely, I'll share. I brought in purslane, common purslane, and this is really starting to emerge in thin turf right now. It's a warm season. It's a warm season annual, and it really likes hot temperatures. So it's just in the last couple weeks we've really seen it start to grow and spread out there. In landscape, or one of the interesting things about this is, you know, folks want to get rid of it through mechanical means, which is great. But if they don't remove the stems from the area for the soil, this plant will reroot at the nodes, and it will just start growing again out there. So for control, if folks need to control this, the most effective management strategy is a pre-emergence followed by growth regulator post-emergence type of application. Many folks are seeing it now and they didn't have a pre-down. They can still get good control with a dicamba or 2,4-D, even though it's a little hot out, and we don't typically recommend those applications when it's hot. If they need to get rid of it, they are effective on controlling purslane.
Is it a tasty addition to a salad?
Yeah, what's the flavor?
What's the flavor like?
Yeah, well,
not
yet. It's it tastes like a plant.
A leaf.
It's not lemony, or
It's kind of lemony.
Yeah, a little bit.
It's an acquired taste.
That's a good way for the home gardener to get rid of them, just keep devouring them.
just graze.
Okay, Lauren,
Graze,
what do you
yeah.
have that is probably not supposed to be that color?
I'm not going to eat this, but you know, hey, I'm one of these days. Anyway, I brought along some cedar apple rust tonight. We're seeing quite a bit of this. It's just really coming out. I have two different ones. Actually, Sarah brought in a sample, and then the one in my hand here just came out of my backyard. This is a golden delicious apple tree. We'll see it on all of our apples, flowering crab apples. You'll see it on some of those. Hawthorns, we have cedar hawthorn rust. Now we're starting to see that as well. All these have these, you know, really bright colored spots, and then if we flip over the leaf, we can see we're at the early stages of this. So we don't see. Eventually, this will these little bumps will swell. And you'll see that's actually where the spores are released, is on the underside of the leaf. So eventually you'll have little fingers sticking out of those and releasing spores. The key thing here is that right now, when you see this on the apple tree or the flowering crab, you're not going to be able to do anything about it. The spores came from the cedar tree. They've infected. There's no more spores coming. So that cycle is finished. But then if you have junipers that you wanted to protect, now's the time to start treating them. So it's just a matter of, you know, if you have it in your landscape that you need to do that or not. You know, and it's usually not needed. It's not going to kill the juniper if you have something like, for for example, if you had some Taylor junipers or something like that that were in close proximity, you might want to treat those because those are going to be a little more sensitive. They're all going to get cedar apple rust, but it could deform the canopy some more.
All right, thank you, Lauren. Sarah, something pretty but potentially not so pretty in its habit.
Yeah, well, and that's the question about this plant. I had the sample brought into the office today, and the question was, is this a weed or is this an ornamental plant? And it kind of depends on your point of view. This is crown vetch, and if you're driving around in the countryside right now, you're going to see this blooming on the sides of the roads. It's used quite a lot on roadsides for erosion control and for reestablishment of banks that have been worked up. And it has these beautiful, beautiful little purplish white flowers, and you know, it's a good plant for bees and various other things that like the nectar. It is a very aggressive plant, though, so it's not something that you're going to be planting in a home garden. But if you're on an acreage or if you're on a farm and maybe you have a really difficult slope where you want to establish something that you don't have to mow that will take over the slope, then crown vetch could be a good plant to choose in that application. So it's one of those plants you have to be careful of because it is very aggressive and it'll take over. So it's pretty, but you know, be a little careful.
All right, thanks, Sarah. Okay, Jim, you get the first question. This is a viewer, they don't tell us where they're from, but they have black spots on the limbs of their birch, and they want to know whether that is scale of some sort and should they be concerned. So I think our viewers can see those little black dotty looking things.
See that. I wonder if that's a dead branch.
Looks pretty dead to me.
If it's dead, it's possibly could be some fruiting bodies that maybe Lauren can talk about. But the only thing that I can think of is there's a life stage of a psyllid, and I forgot the name of it. A psyllid is kind of like related to an aphid, but it has, or like even whiteflies. It has a pupal stage, you might say, and this is kind of unusual, but it looks like a scale, and they have the same kind of appearance there. So if you see any like greenish insects hopping around with piercing, sucking mouth parts, that happens to be one of the stages of development in the life cycle of it. That's the only thing I think of, and that's kind of a vague answer. Actually, I would think that we'd probably need something, a specimen that would be living. Otherwise, I think maybe it might be some kind of some fruiting bodies on a dead branch.
Well, and we do see a lot of different fungi when we get a dead, you know, any kind of dead plant material, you'll see things taken off, and if, you know, it's easy to identify if it is cause and effect if we see clean material and then that. I can't really tell from that particular picture.
Okay, so maybe a sample.
Good sample would be a good idea on that one.
All right. Yeah. All right, Lowell, this is a viewer who found a healthy goosegrass plant
Okay.
while weeding the garden, and this is actually from Kearney.
Okay.
And of course the question then is, very healthy plant, what do we do to manage goosegrass?
Goosegrass, it can be pretty tough to control. That's a really good picture. Folks can see the whitish silver tint to the center of the plant there. A couple things, it tends to come up a little after crabgrass. It's a very late emerger, and it really is, it can be a pretty ugly plant in closely mowed, highly managed areas because it can survive very close mowing out there. From a chemical management standpoint, if folks use sequential applications of any of the pre-emergence grass products, they should be pretty effective at controlling that. Post-emergence, spot treatment with Roundup or glyphosate is probably about the best way to take care of it, and kind of maybe reseeding over that area or something like that. But a sequential application of pre's is kind of the long-term better approach.
Okay, or due diligence with a hoe.
Yeah.
All right. All right, Lauren, you have a viewer in Omaha who has 5 to 6 year old black raspberry plants. He says this is the third year of seeing the problems, and this is both last year's stock and the current year. Small brown ovals that grow and gradually take over the plant, leaves and stems fall off, and of course production does as well. He does try to garden it organically, so the question is what to do here.
A few things here. If you look at the picture, you can see some, you know, kind of a long splotches or lesions on the canes, and I think in this case we're looking at anthracnose with that, and with any of our cane diseases in any of the brambles. Probably the number one thing if you're doing an organic system is to try to, use sanitation to your advantage as much as possible. So making sure that you're removing, after those canes fruit. With black raspberries, I'm pretty sure those are going to be second-year cane fruiting varieties most likely. So after they fruit, they'll remove any of the dead material. You could do anything you can to try to get more air movement in there. If you have them up on some sort of a trellis or something to keep them up, that's going to help as well. And then finally would be not overhead watering. You may be doing that already, but if you could do soaker hoses or something like that, just to try to avoid moisture, try to increase air circulation as much as you can, that would be the best thing. And you may even decide to try to cut some little openings in the canopy even to get some more air circulation. That would really favor less disease as well if you want to stay completely organic.
All right, thanks, Lauren. Yeah. Sarah, you have 5 pictures of maples from 3 different viewers. The first being west side of Lincoln, and we have 2 red sunset maples, probably with trunk damage on the south and west sides. The second is a viewer who had a small child tore the bark off the tree, and he's wondering whether it is something that can be saved. And then we have also a red maple, which is actually a Crimson King, probably red foliaged, in Elgin with basal damage and then not completely leafing out. So we have all that series of maples there. Do you want to kind of talk about what's going on?
Sure. Maples have a common problem when they're young, particularly in that the bark is very thin and it's easily damaged. One of the things that we see happening to them in the winter months is on the south or the west side of the tree, the bark will get very warm on a warm winter day, and then at night when the temperatures drop, you actually get ice crystals forming in the cells of the bark, which then cause the cells to die because the cell walls are broken. And it causes this section of dead bark on the south or the west side of the tree. We often call that a frost crack. And so maples are so susceptible to this because the bark is thin and it's very easily damaged by this in the winter. Those first pictures look like they could have been caused by a frost crack. To prevent that, you would want to shade the bark during the winter months so that the sun wasn't shining right on it, and that can help to prevent that. But there are other issues with maples too. The crimson or the red colored leaf maples they're not as vigorous as a green leaf maple, and they really need to be planted more just in the southeast corner of the state. Really beyond that, they're really out of their range of adaptation, and they really struggle quite a bit. Any other type of trunk or bark injury that we see is definitely a serious problem for the tree, and it's going to disrupt movement of water and nutrients up and down that section of the trunk. And so if you have a tree that's got an injury like that, and then we have some additional stress thrown onto that tree, like last summer's extreme drought conditions, you can see that tree actually having enough problems that it starts to decline. And you might see a thin canopy, or you might see some branch dieback. And if it's severe enough, you might see the tree just dying completely. So, definitely, we always recommend that you mulch around the base of trees to keep the mower away, to prevent bark damage, and prevent bark damage from any other possible source. A child isn't what we usually think of, but other things can damage trees too, deer rubbing and all sorts of things. So protect that bark. It's really important that not be damaged so that you can have a healthy tree.
Okay, Jim, you get the next picture. And this is actually a viewer who has sour cherries, lots of flowers, numbers of cherries have been few. We actually talked about this a bit on air last week, but we didn't really have the pictures to work with. The few cherries he gets looks like they have lesions. And he's kind of wondering whether this is something that you would expect to see from insects. He has been using a fruit tree spray. He avoided spraying when the buds were forming until after petal drop had occurred. So I don't know if there are particular insect pests of cherries that would lead to this.
Well, we had cherry maggot, which is the main, there's also plum curculio and cherry maggot. They're the main pests that affect cherries. Both of them can actually sting. You might say the plum curculio tries to deposit an egg in the cherry as it's just developing. And then the cherry maggot will actually sting it and deposit an egg in it. So you can have scarring from those kinds of insects, and they can abort. And if there was a regular orchard spray treatment going on, perhaps that kept most of them off, but you can actually have that physical damage. I'm thinking that might be a possibility, but I think there's probably more going on with the tree, perhaps, and maybe the cycles of fruit production.
So maybe
Well,
what?
the thing that I was concerned a little bit about with that question, Kim, is they said they were using carbaryl.
Right.
And carbaryl has
Yes,
been used as a blossom, it stops flowers from
Right.
setting fruit.
Right.
So if they're not getting their timing quite right, they may actually be causing the problem and not allowing the
space.
flowers to set.
That's true.
Right. So pay attention to
Yeah.
don't do that.
Yeah,
next
because I
year.
know plum curculial treatment involves carbaryl, but you could switch to something like permethrin, and you wouldn't have
that
that
a shot.
thinning phenomenon going
Right.
on.
All right, thanks, guys. Lowell, we had a question last week or a couple weeks ago about somebody who wanted an identification of pineapple weed.
Okay.
And she was describing it, but we didn't have a picture of it, and now we have the Husker picture of it. And the question still is it something that needs to be controlled, or is it just sort of interesting?
It's sort of interesting. It has real fine lacy foliage on it, and that yellow flower, when it flowers, if you rub that between your fingers, it actually smells like pineapple there. In that picture there, it looks like it's in kind of a gravel area. Both glyphosate or Roundup and 2,4-D should be good on it. At this point in the year, folks should probably use Roundup instead of 2,4-D because of the temperatures if they really want to get rid of it. It's pretty easy to control if it's in waste areas there. If they don't mind it, it's kind of interesting.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Lauren, this is a St. Paul viewer who has cantaloupe. Half of the plant is dying, and she says this happened literally overnight. She's wondering if should worry about the other plants in her melon patch. Is it systemic? The leaves have some rust of some sort on them. She has been watching because she says she may go rogue out this particular plant. So she wants your advice on this one.
I think I would rogue this one out. In this case, it looks to me like maybe a bacterial wilt scenario possibly. And that we're going to go over and talk to Jim probably a little bit on management of the beetle that vectors that is one idea. That when I see that browning on the leaf, I think it's just burning probably from the dying and wilting of the plant. There are a lot of foliar diseases on cucurbits, but I really think in this case it's most likely bacterial wilt.
All right.
So it would be good to rogue it out. And then I don't know, as far as the cucumber beetles, Jim, what would you say to?
Well, frankly, it's really hard to control them.
Yeah.
The striped one flies in. Probably about now will be flying in, and there's all alternate host plants that are related, that are vectors or reservoirs for the
beastie.
Yeah, so it really is tough. How can you protect them? And then you have to have the pollination
Right.
factor, so you can cover them temporarily until it's time for them to pollinate and produce a fruit. But then
Farmer's
again, they
market.
become vulnerable to farmer's market, somebody who knows how to.
Okay,
Throw a bunch
Sarah,
of them, rogue them out.
there you go. Sarah, you get the last picture on this particular round, and this has to do with mulch, which is how can we stop these kinds of things? It is rampant in communities. What do we say about volcano mulch?
Yeah, this is definitely a bad practice, and I think, unfortunately, Kim, that it may have gotten started in the landscape maintenance industry just through a little bit of laziness, and you can almost even see in that picture where there was a truck that drove down by the side of those trees, and the guys were probably shoveling mulch around the trees, but then they never went back with a rake to spread that mulch out, and so they just left it piled up around the sides of the trees. And we see this so much now that I think a lot of home gardeners think that this is the way it's supposed to be done.
Right.
And so, you see them repeating it. But you definitely don't want mulch around the bark because it's going to hold moisture against the bark, which could encourage bark rots. And it's a great place for insects to get under or be protected in that area of the bark and actually start to cause some damage there too. So we definitely want to pull that mulch away so that it's nice in a nice flat pancake about 2 to 3 inches deep and not piled up against the trunk that way.
All right, Jim, you get a question. This is a viewer who, they live 2 miles off a highway with a gravel driveway. They've had lots of June bugs. they say that the interesting thing is their gravel driveway is loaded with dead ones, but there aren't any in the turf and there aren't any on the gravel road, and they wonder what is it in the gravel on their driveway that makes them the cemetery for the June bugs.
Well, Watson, let's try to think about this one. I suspect that probably it's they're being attracted to the lights associated with the exterior of the house somewhere. The lights are on at night. The beetles are nocturnal. They come out and they start moving toward the light. They can't control themselves. And then also what happens is once you have a number of beetles aggregated together, it's time for them to mate and everything. And so they produce these aggregation pheromones. And so it just keeps building and building. And in some country locations, or at least on the peripheries of cities, when the lights are on, these mass migrations of especially those larger May beetles, Philophaga, is amazing. Where to get rid of them, you have to bring out your old snow shovel and scoop them up and put them in the trash or whatever. And so they're that sensitive to the light. So that's what I think the issue is. It can't be anything else.
Okay, thanks, Jim. All right, this is almost lightning, Lowell. Does Drive work on bindweed?
A single application, it will help. Bindweed is a perennial, and we always talk about chemical management with field bindweed, deep rhizomes, and a single application may burn it back, but you're going to have your best luck with sequential applications of that, and probably better luck with fall applications because that's when it's going to take it down to the roots better than now.
All right. Lauren, an Irvington viewer is wondering about powder on their lawn in 10-inch circles. What is that?
Powder on their lawn in 10-inch circles. Okay, I'm going to say powdery mildew, or and that could be if it's in the shade. And so if it looks like a powdery substance that way. Now, if it's patches and it's real dense, then we're going to go slime mold. So it's hard to say from that description. Both of them, at this point, I don't really think I would treat. If it's the thicker stuff, I would just take a hose and wash it away.
All right.
I think it's slime
I'm guessing
mold,
that'll be the first of those questions during this season.
Yeah.
Sarah, this is a viewer who had something bite the leaves off their sweet potato plants. They still have some some foliage. Do they go ahead and let them try to continue to grow potatoes?
Yeah, I would. Sweet potato plants are pretty vigorous and they grow pretty quickly. So I think that they will generate some new foliage. I'd definitely leave them in the ground and give them a chance for the rest of the summer.
Okay, Jim, we have a viewer who sent us an image of a spider that was crawling on him. And he said the two in the front are kind of a little thicker. It looks like boxing gloves.
Right, yeah.
And look like a little claw. And they wonder, he kind of just wonders what it is, and then is it a biter?
Okay, that looks very much to me like a male jumping spider. And, maybe it is mature because it has its parts on it that it needs that makes it a male. But they're going to be very small compared to the other kinds of jumping spiders there are. And we have a number of species. So if it rotates, like an army tank or whatever, when it follows you around, it's got really keen eyesight, and that's the way it behaves. That's a good way of telling that it's a jumping spider, plus it moves in jerky motions.
Okay, all righty. A good guy, in other words.
It's a good guy.
Okay, Lowell, this is a viewer in Hastings who has some sort of a grass that appears in its old, taller fescue, starts in the valleys between the clumps, eventually takes over, very fine with intense roots, not hard to pull, but he wonders what it is, and it seems that he'd rather not have this in his turf.
I think they said it was thriving in some shade areas.
Right.
I think so. Zach and I looked at this, and it's pretty hard to tell what the grass is for sure from the picture. But we think it's Poa trivialis is what this is. It's a kind of a bit of a weedy bluegrass in there, and unfortunately, the only way to remove that from a fescue turf is to use Roundup and just kind of renovate the areas where it is, because there's not a selective herbicide that will remove it from the turf. So if they really want to get rid of it, Roundup and renovation.
All right. Thank you, Lowell. Lauren, you have a couple of people who sent in subterranean, perhaps mushroom things, and last week Amy had on the subterranean parts of the stinkhorn, which was not nice of her. So, so this is the first one, and he has sent in this picture, and then the second one that kind of goes with it, and then the next viewer sent in an image of that.
Okay.
So they were wondering what they are.
First, that one that we have on the screen now, that's a stinkhorn. And that's just where it's split open. Usually that area around it will be gelatinous. It'll have like a jelly-like
That's
substance.
what she said, yep.
And then
yep.
they'll come out and produce a fruiting structure. It's anywhere from 4 to 8 inches tall, sometimes depending on the species. Now, the other one's a little more difficult though. Now, it does look, if any of our viewers have ever seen truffles, we have seen truffles in Nebraska. And you can't have those when you're digging around in the landscape. That particular picture looked like it had a large root of a tree or something attached to it, which makes me think it might have been some sort of a gall. We will also see like agrobacterium and crown galls on roots that are exposed. So we'll see galling that way. The other thing we'll see sometime are fungi that will colonize roots like that and then produce a really hardened fruiting structure. I can't say for sure what those are, but those are some options that you could look more at. And if they're really curious, they could also just bring a sample in and send a sample in to get it identified.
All right, and
Some of those are really difficult to identify too. Some of those basidiomycetes that colonize roots and produce fruiting structures, some of them can be quite difficult.
And we'll say don't eat the one you
Yes, don't eat any of them.
unless you have
Yeah,
a truffle-sniffing pig, right?
And even that, I don't know.
Let the pig have it.
I didn't feel comfortable identifying it myself.
Okay, Sarah, this is a viewer who from Blue Hill. She sent us actually a great series of images. She has Vevoom, orange roses, and she's got 3 essentially. Prolific growers for about 4 years. She did have some fungal issues in the wet year, but she treated that. But now she's seeing what was Vevoom turn into red, and she's wondering what has happened and what she can do about it.
These are really good pictures, Kim, illustrating a rose that is sending up shoots from its root system. And so the orange rose that you see in this picture is the actual cultivar that she had purchased, but the reddish roses are coming up from the root system. So what you would need to do in this case would be to cut all those stems down that have the red flowers on them. Or if there were stems that weren't blooming but they had that foliage that was slightly different than the foliage of the orange Vevoom rose, you'd want to eliminate that. If you don't, what may happen is that the root system, since the rootstocks are usually so strong and vigorous, it may actually overtake the orange part of the plant, and it may that part may die. So definitely get out there with your pruners, and I would cut those all away.
Okay, Jim, you have a viewer who has one of the hardy native asters, and these pictures show damage of all sorts and some insect frass. I think all of a sudden all over the plants.
Can use the word frass, and those are the fecal pellets, and they have the shape of some kind of a caterpillar that's probably feeding in the growing points of the asters, because that's the most delicious part. And then, of course, you can try to come out at nighttime and look and see if you can find caterpillar activity, because they often will feed at night. And then it looks like there's a lot of leaf hopper or perhaps garden flea hopper damage on those as well. And those are what are causing the flecking, because they have needle-like mouth parts and they're sucking at the tissue in various places. And so, of course, that's going to damage the plants pretty extensively, and it'll be a cumulative kind of an effect. So I would suggest that there be some treatment made to control that, and I think perhaps the cyfluthrin or the bifenthrin would be good, because they have more longevity to it. But you can simply treat with permethrin with thorough coverage, and that'll probably do it. And then just keep an eye on it every now and then. If it needs to be treated again, go ahead and do that. If you're a non-chemical person, try on a cool day. If we can guarantee a cool day, try an insecticidal soap.
All right, thank you, Jim. Lowell, you're going to get 3 that absolutely have nothing to do with turf except for what they look like in a row. This is a viewer with a purple beech that has leaves that are showing curling and cupping. We have a viewer with red buds, a new one in the back, an older one in the front. This particular viewer had done some weed management of some sort, and a third one who from Creighton lost 20 peonies that came up did sort of this thing, and she cut them all back. So any thoughts on those?
Okay. The first and the third one, it's probably a little difficult to tell exactly what it was, but the second one there had that really classic vein strapping and deformation of the leaves that you get with a growth regulator herbicide on that. Folks get, there's two types of movement or drift possibility. One is from the physical application, which can happen with any herbicide. The second is volatilization, which commonly or can happen with 2,4-D and dicamba under very warm conditions. And that's why we recommend avoiding spraying the 2,4-D and dicamba during these hot times of year, because it's very unpredictable where those chemicals might move when they volatilize.
Right, so even though the viewer didn't do it, it came from somewhere.
It's entirely possible, yeah.
All right. Well, we have a couple of announcements of interesting, fun things in the gardening world coming up for our viewers. The first of those is the Community Crops Garden Gala this Saturday, 10 to 2, Antelope Park Church of the Brethren here in Lincoln. We have a number on the screen and a website for people. The second one is the Benson Community Garden Annual Yard Sale, June 28th and 29th. That is in Omaha, and there is a number on the screen to call for more information on that one as well. Those community gardens are fun things. Okay, Lauren, I believe you get a picture. This is also something interesting, and we're seeing a lot of this in Lincoln too. This is a Columbus viewer, saw this, it developed overnight. It looked like freshly poured pancake batter. By noon, it had developed cracks that oozed blood red liquid, and then it dried and looked like dried blood, and then it turned yellow.
Or maybe it's syrup on the pancake.
There you go.
So yeah, this is a slime mold, and these come in all different colors and shapes. That is probably the nicest description I've ever heard. People tend to refer to them as many other things, but anyway, no, it's slime mold. You'll see them bright yellow, orange, pink. White's the most common in yellow. It's not doing anything. You can simply wash it away with a hose.
All right, thank you,
And it will
Lauren.
come back.
Sarah, you have the final picture of the evening rather quickly, and this is a viewer that has a Pat Morash, 5 to 6 years old, has this issue and is, she's thinking that this is the problem with, there's some sort of a disease. Can you comment on what the real issue is here and whether she should replace this tree?
Yeah, this is another example of physical damage to the bark, and it looks like this tree was damaged while it was staked when it was new, causing that compression injury around the trunk. That's going to be a weak point on this tree pretty much for its whole life, and so it could just easily snap off right at that place. But the compression of the staking material has also probably affected the cambium, and so there's probably not as good movement through that area of water and nutrients as there should be. So I would expect to see a thin canopy on this tree, poor growth, maybe some branch dieback over the years, and maybe this year it's showing more stress because it has added on last year's summer's drought. So I don't think this is a long-term tree, unfortunately. I would start over, and I would be more careful with the staking materials, or just don't stake at all. We recommend oftentimes these days that unless a tree is in an extremely windy site, you may not even have to stake it, and then you totally eliminate the risk of having that type of damage.
Exactly. Thank you, Sarah. Jim, you have a lightning round question pretty much here with the amount of time we have left. Fremont viewer has ash with borer damages, used to spray with lindane in June. What is the replacement chemical?
The replacement is bifenthrin because it has several weeks of longevity to it, so you only need to apply it maybe 2 times during a maybe 3-month period to cover that time when these borers would reinfest. You're just trying to prevent that from happening, so that's a good choice, bifenthrin.
All right, and Lowell, 10 seconds worth to say what is that in front of you?
Leafy spurge. We talked about it earlier, noxious weed in Nebraska, and you can find it in about any environment.
You certainly can, and the control is pretty tricky.
Yeah.